Hello, welcome. My name's Fleur. I'm the owner of the Sevenoaks Bookshop, and this evening we're going to be speaking to Nina Stibbe about her novel Man at the Helm. So welcome everybody, and welcome Nina.
Hello everybody.
Hi Nina, thank you so much for coming along this evening. I know we were just saying briefly, like, we've wanted to do something for a very long time, from I don't know when I first met you, some time ago at Port Eliot Festival, I think.
Yes, years ago. We've said we were going to do something with Daisy Buchanan, and I was going to come to you, and we never have. But here we are now. It took a global pandemic to get us together, but we're here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, honestly, it's lovely. And I thought I'd begin by just asking you to just give a little summary, like introduction summary sort of thing for Man at the Helm, just so if anybody wasn't able to make it tonight, and then they could just hear like a little bit, because clearly they will want to read it. But yeah.
Okay, Man at the Helm is my first novel, and I didn't ever mean to reveal that it's very autobiographical, but it's quite an autobiographical novel, and it's set in the 1970s. It's loosely about my family, and we lived in the Midlands, and we had quite a sort of a successful middle-class existence, and then my parents divorced, and things hit the skids a little bit. We moved to a village, and we weren't terribly welcome there. My mum became a bit lonely, and she behaved quite badly, in inverted commas. And then we had a sort of a riches to rags moment where we lost all our money. And so it's really about a family coping in difficult circumstances. And I think the period setting is quite important. If you like reading about the 70s, and you like reading about English life and family life, I think it would possibly appeal to you. Is that a good enough description, Fleur? Have I said enough?
I think that's perfect.
Anything to add?
I think that's perfect. I thought, actually, because you mentioned the period descriptions, I thought maybe that would be a nice place to start, because you use so many phrases that, like holiday of a lifetime, and the Carmen rollers for dogs who are going to be at Crufts, all of these things that so sort of like pin it to the period. And I wondered what you did, like when you were just trying to sort of go back, if there was anything. I imagine you watching back-to-back episodes of Blankety Blank, but that's just like, I don't know what if you could talk about.
I think Blankety Blank was the 80s.
Oh,
but anyway, maybe it wasn't. I've got a really good memory, and I think that's what the first thing to say is I've been writing Man at the Helm for a long time. I started writing it when I was at Polytechnic in the 80s, and so I didn't have to remember very far back, if you see what I mean. So I started writing it back then when I was at college, and I've just sort of been honing it ever since, or I was for a long time. And so, but I also have got a very good memory, and not just for details about my own life, but for things that I don't know whether it's people of my age, but we loved television. It was very important to us. So advertisements on the telly and brand names. I was very status oriented. I wanted to have this particular shampoo. You know, I wanted Silvercrin, or I wanted the Linko beer shampoo, or, you know, I wanted certain things that I'd seen in the magazines and on the telly and the Maxwell House. And I hated that my mum didn't buy the brand names. You know, we had this shop called Woolco. I don't know if anyone else had Woolco, but we had Woolco, and its own brand was I think it was called Winfield, and it was all cheap and horrible, and I wanted what I thought was the proper stuff, and so that stuck with me, and I think that gives it flavour. And yeah, I've just got a good memory.
I think there is a lovely bit. I'm just going to do like for nods of assent. Everybody's read it. That's my assumption, isn't it? Everybody's read it. So there's no spoilers, nothing. I mean, you give the shopping list of the shopping that gets delivered at the end, and it is just this lovely list of all of those things that you go, gosh, I remember that, or not, or whatever. But yeah. It's all in there.
Yes, and there are things that I didn't realise that you can't get anymore. One was, I think, Pal dog food. I don't think you can get Pal anymore, but everyone used to. There was Pal or Chum, and I don't think Chum exists anymore. It's now called Pedigree, because of course, when you write a book, and some of you may have written a book and you'll know about this, but when you write a book, you hand over the manuscript, and once it's been edited, you get a copy editor, and they check everything, well, nearly everything. Occasionally things slip through. And one of the things in Man at the Helm, for those of you that have read it, you'll know that we went to the fair and we took some money. I took some money out of my mum's purse. And when I first wrote that scene, I wrote that we took a £20 note. And the copy editor said something like, you know, that would have been £200. I can't remember, but he said, you know, you would never have taken that much money. And I also said that we'd seen a little egret, or a little egret, a bird had been seen. And he got back and said, little egrets were never as far north as the Midlands in the 70s. They might be now, but they weren't. And so everything gets checked. So it is quite fascinating. Another thing I said was that my brother Little Jack's teacher arrived in her tiny Vauxhall car, and he said there were no tiny Vauxhalls. Vauxhalls at that time, there were only big ones. So it's amazing the detail gets checked, and that was one of the biggest surprises for me as a novelist. It hadn't happened with Love Nina, which was my memoir in letters, because it really was written at the time. So, you know, there weren't many issues, but with Man at the Helm, there was probably about 10 things that I got picked up on, and you know, that wouldn't have happened. There weren't, you know, that didn't exist anymore. You know, that kind of thing. It's absolutely wonderful.
And then, I mean, you've just mentioned that it is quite autobiographical, and for anyone who's read Love Nina, that's when you've left the village and you're sort of striking out after college, and then it would be the imagined kind of the bit before. I just loved your family. I loved the closeness. I mean, I don't know, it did make me think, like, you know, of I keep wanting to say your mum, and I have met your mum, Elspeth, and so I'm just thinking that she is Adele. But just the closeness of the relationship, where she is sort of come down to the children, and her children have sort of come up to meet her, and they're in this sort of middle ground with the children cooking and cleaning, and her writing plays and acting them out with them. So it's a sort of, you know, an unusual time. But yeah, I'd love you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, one of the big issues in publishing the book was my mum and protecting her, or not, you know, exposing her. So I had to speak to her about it and get her to read the manuscript before I sent it finally into Penguin. And she, you know, you can imagine this, Fleur, you've met her a number of times. So I said, come and stay and read this book. And she said, oh no, it'll be fine. I said, no, Mum, I really think you should read it, because it's very revealing and you'll know it's true. Even if I present it as a novel, you and many of the people around you will know that this is basically autobiographical. And she just couldn't really be bothered. And I'd find her sitting at my computer, and I'd know she wasn't reading it because the screen would have gone into that mountain background. So it would have just closed, you know, it would have gone to sleep. So I'd say, Mum, you know, you've got to read it. And eventually I got her to sit and read it. And I said to her, is there anything you're not comfortable with in here? And she said, she complained about the names I'd chosen for the children, because I didn't use real names. And she complained about, you know, that she wouldn't have said, damn it. or and I said, but Mum, what about when we went to London to buy drugs for you when we were age 9 and 10? Did you mind that? And she went, oh no, everybody did that. So she was quite fussy, but about things that just wouldn't have occurred to me. And around that time, I heard Helm talking on Radio 4 writing about his mother, and the interviewer said, did your mum mind? And he said, well, I checked everything, and she did mind. She didn't mind any of the things that I thought were awful, but she minded that he'd written her taking a handful of cutlery and plonking it on the table and not setting it out. That's what she'd minded. And I thought it's funny that I had that exact thing with my mum. She didn't mind, abortions and pills and drugs and drink and promiscuity and, but she didn't like the name Danny.
I know. I love that. I mean, the going to London to buy drugs, I mean, that is extraordinary. I mean, I feel like I had such a sheltered childhood by comparison, because I never probably caught a train on my own. I probably didn't catch a bus on my own until I was about 12, let alone go all the way to London.
But you're younger, aren't you, Fleur? You're probably many years younger than me. When were you born? What year were you born?
77.
77, so you're much younger than me. And I think in the 60s and the early 70s, a lot more was going on. We hadn't quite, I think parenting had come to a strange place where I don't think parents had the luxury of just adoring their children at that time. We hadn't got to that. And I remember it wasn't just me. I mean, I don't think any of my friends were buying drugs for their mother in London. I know that was quite extreme. But if your parents saw you in the house and you were 10 and it wasn't a blizzard, they would say, what the hell are you doing? Get out. A lot of my friends talk about that. And that's certainly the case for me. If we were in the house, our mother would say that I'm writing a play, fuck off. I'm sorry to swear, but she would. She didn't want us around.
So was Elspeth really writing plays?
Yes,
I have to say, I adored the plays.
She wrote the plays, and I was very nice to her about the plays, because she wrote the plays and they were quite good, but they were very long. But she also wrote poetry, and the way she wrote poetry is she'd find a poem that she liked, and then she'd sort of copy it using the thesaurus. And she'd sometimes wake us up at night to come and read one. She was very lonely. I think that's the interesting thing. A lot of her, bad behaviour came from loneliness. And even to this day, I like to go to bed early. I'm not a reveller, because I used to go to bed early as a child, and you'd hear her come up the stairs. You'd wake up and she'd say, oh, I'd written this poem. I just want to read it to you. And you'd think, oh no. So she was lonely, but she was very creative. I mean, she didn't wake us up for a chat. She woke us up to talk about, Edna O'Brien or something.
And how old would you have been then?
Oh gosh, 9, 8.
Extraordinary. I don't know, the other thing I wanted to bring up, and so we've said that there's so much sort of autobiographical things and everything, but really, ponies upstairs.
Yeah.
Did that ever happen in your life?
Yes, that did happen. I did have this. I was given this pony that I didn't really want a pony, but my dog's whining. Can I just let her? Eva, can you come and let Peggy out? Sorry, guys. Sorry.
All right.
She insisted on coming in.
We met Ben Meyer's dog Cliff last time, so.
Oh, she's gone now. Peggy's gone. She insisted on coming in, and then I shut the door for noise reasons. Anyway, my sister had a pony, but she really wanted one, and she'd made a fuss, and she was given this pony, and then because my mum felt it wasn't fair that she had one and I didn't, I had to have one. I didn't really want one. I liked riding, but I didn't want my own pony. I'd seen the high maintenance thing of ponies and I just didn't really want it. Anyway, she found me this pony and he was genuinely a real character. It was bizarre. He could get out of any field. He could get out of any stable. He'd literally just climb over. He could turn the tap on with his hoof. He was an amazing pony, but he wasn't. You just didn't want a pony like that. I remember going to Pony Club camp, and he escaped and got into the feed room, and he was just naughty and funny and cute. But he would come inside, and I remember once as in the book, we were playing around on this 4-poster bed and shutting the curtains and opening, and I think we heard him come into the kitchen, so we called him and he came up, but he couldn't get down again, and that was it. I mean, I made it sound quite funny, but actually at the time it was quite scary because it was literally this pony just at the top of the stairs, and they were quite steep stairs, and they sort of went round, and they were wooden, and anyway, he did get down in the end, but we did have to blindfold him. It was horrible.
With a bikini?
I don't know if I made that up. My sister says she thinks it's real, but I now think I wrote that a long time ago, and now it feels as if we did. But should we say yes, it was a bikini top?
It seems like a really logical option, and I think that's one of the things that I loved about the book was these things are incredulous, and at the same time, well, of course, that does have exactly the right sort of shape that you would possibly need to blinker a pony should you end up with a pony.
It must be true. It must be true.
I don't know. I'm gonna ask everyone else what questions they have and everything else, but I just wanted, I know whilst we're just talking about you, Nina, and not so much about the book, because I think everyone else is going to have more bookish questions, and I just had a couple of things. So the first of all, the one I wanted to ask you was because you were shortlisted for the Bollinger P.G. Wodehouse Prize for comedy in fiction, is that the title, something like that, for this one?
You're blending two. Well, there's the Bollinger Wodehouse one, and then there's the Comedy Women in Print.
Right. So it's the Bollinger that I wanted to talk about, because you were shortlisted for this one, then you were shortlisted for the next one, and then you won for Reasons to Be Cheerful. And is it true that you get given a pig?
Yes, you do. You're given a pig, but you can't take it home. You don't get custody of it. You have to. It lives on a farm in Hay-on-Wye, but you do get visiting rights. And I got this pig, and my pig was enormous. Really, it was bigger than me, and really hairy, and it was beautiful. It really was. It was called Patches, but then they named them. Apparently, they named the pig after your book, so he's now called Cheerful. But he didn't look cheerful. He looked. He was amazing, but you're given a pig, and then you're given a great big, tall bottle of champagne. Is it a Methuselah or a Methuselah? I think it is. Anyway, you get this enormous bottle of champagne, and then you get 6 other bottles of champagne. And because it was a rollover year, I think you got 12 bottles because they didn't award it the year before. Did you hear about that?
I think I did. There was nothing funny enough, so they just said they weren't going to give the prize.
Yeah, they said nothing made them lol. Nothing made them lol. I just thought that was so mean. I really wasn't impressed with that at all. I mean, what an awful. Just imagine if you're a writer and you've handed over your book and your publisher tells you that they put you forward for this prize. I mean, it just seemed like such a kick in the teeth to writers, particularly comedy writers. Anyway, I thought that was very mean, and I said so, in an interview, and it was printed in the Guardian. And I thought then, I can never win it now. I'll be punished forever. But maybe that's why I won it. Maybe they thought, oh, we've now got to be nice to her, or she'd be horrible to us forever.
Is it the same judges then? Is it the same judges, or is it different judges?
It's the same. It's this really lovely guy, Jim Naughtie from Radio 4 is one of them. And he's lovely. He's always been very supportive to me. And then there's this other chap from the Everyman Library, and they do all the Woodhouse books. And then there's those two, and then they have a handful of other judges. But the year I won it last year, because it's just happening again now, but last year when I won it, there was a couple of women on the panel, and actually, seriously, Marianne Keyes had been very outspoken about the Woodhouse Prize, saying, why don't women ever win it? You know, it's been going for 20 years and only 3 women have won it, or 2 women have won it. So she did me a huge favour, because I think they had to have a woman. And yeah, and then I'd been cross with them, and they know I'm good at handling pigs. So that's probably why I won it. But it was very nice to win it. It was very nice. Winning is nice. I hadn't realised how nice. I never really bothered about winning before. I always think just, you know, take part and have fun. But actually winning, it did feel really nice. I'm going to become a real diva now. I want to win everything.
And okay, so the only other question that is totally unrelated to Man at the Helm that I wanted to ask you, and that was about, do you still drive a Mazda Bongo? That was the thing.
Well, we've still got our Bongo. It's in the drive now, but we've had it, oh gosh. My son must have been about 3 when we got it. He's now 18. So we had it 15 years. And we're just about to give it away. Yeah, sorry. We've still got it, and we're very sad about it. Why do you ask about the Bongo?
I'm asking about the Bongo. So for anybody, I'm going to probably do the Mazda Bongos a disservice. For anybody who doesn't know, they sort of call themselves a camper van, but really they're more of a car. And they're
narrow.
They're very narrow. They don't really fit much in a sort of camping capacity. But my mum has a Mazda Bongo that she's also thinking of getting rid of. My mum's Mazda Bongo is got the extra name of, it's a Mazda Bongo Friendly with a double.
Oh, you've got Friendly. Does the roof go up?
The roof does. The roof should go up.
Oh, ours is a Friendly. It doesn't go up.
It doesn't go up. And part of the reason it's going to cost her so much money to fix it, she's thinking of getting rid of it this summer. And I'm reading, I can't remember the name that Lizzie that they gave the car, but it was just the idea of naming cars, and the fact that my mum has a Mazda Bongo called Percy for some reason, and I'm still sort of vaguely embarrassed about it, even though I'm like a grown-up and not a 9-year-old. But I'm just embarrassed by the fact that she's called this car randomly Percy, and that it's a Mazda Bongo Friendly. And then I read that you had one.
Yeah, no, we've had one. We love ours, but it's not very environmentally good, and I think that's really why we just sort of think, actually, we live in Cornwall, and we sort of go to beaches, and it's, you can see it's not a healthy, it's not good for the environment, so we just don't want to use it anymore. And we're just having it sitting in the drive because our guinea pig had babies in it, and you know, we've had it for so long and that kind of thing. But this naming cars thing, I mean, why wouldn't you name a car? What kind of monster wouldn't name a car? I don't know.
Can we just do a poll of everyone who's got a square that's showing? If you have a car, raise your hand if it has a name.
Liz?
1, 2.
Liz hasn't named her car. Maybe she hasn't got a car.
7. Gosh, okay, that's fairly comprehensive. So that's like vindicated, Nina.
I think naming things is nice, and my daughter just got a little car and she named it T-Rex, which I thought was hilarious. But I've just written about naming cars in the book I'm writing at the moment, because I've got a character whose name is Susan, and she goes for an interview, and which involves part of the job is driving, and they think it's hilarious that the car is also called Susan, but she thinks that's a little bit offensive. So yeah, naming cars is a big thing, Fleur.
What's your Bongo called then? And then we can move on.
Noddy.
What's it called?
Noddy.
Noddy. Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to go to Rochelle. Rochelle, I think you've got a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask Nina your question?
Hi, Nina. Hi. two small questions. One is, how old is Lizzie when she's narrating and looking back at her 9-year-old self? And the other question is, why is your sister not named?
Yeah, the first question is such a brilliant question, Rochelle, because when Lizzie's narrating from when I first started writing the book, I started writing that book probably in 1986, when I was doing a course at my Polytechnic called Autobiography and Fiction, and I had to write a bit of autobiography, and I started writing in Lizzie's voice. And so the answer is she's probably 20. I went to uni, went to Poly when I was probably 21 or 22. So she's very early 20s. But not many people pick up on that. That it's clearly not the 50-year-old me the age I was when I published the book. I'm clearly not that old, but I'm not 9. So yeah, because she refers to it being back then a lot, doesn't she? She says, you won't believe, at one point she says, you know, another leaflet came through the door. They weren't as prevalent then as they are now. So there's lots of little hints that it's not now, but it's not, yeah, so very observant. And the other question is the sister. Well, I had to name everybody, give everybody a different name, but I sort of wanted to keep the flavour of who they were. My brother, Little Jack, is actually 2 brothers because I couldn't handle all of them. So I amalgamated 2 brothers, and I didn't know what to call my sister. My sister's real name is Victoria, and I wanted her to have that sort of name. But I've got these other 2 half sisters in my life now. My dad had other kids, and they've got 2 other sort of Victoria type names. And every time I tried a name, it didn't fit. And so I thought, well, I'll deal with that later, deal with it later, deal with it later. And then it seemed to work not having a name. And,
I agree.
And yeah, because I didn't set out to do that, but it sort of gave her a mystery. What did you think, Rochelle? I'm interested.
Well, you actually said in the book that you held her in high esteem.
Yes.
Because I think, was it Melody also held your sister in high esteem?
Yes, yes.
And I think by not naming her and not elevated her, she was the sister. So yeah, it worked.
It was her job. It was her title, and also it protected her. And I, Lizzie, and I, Nina, wanted to protect her. And later, I don't know if you've read the later 2 books, but in the 3rd book, which is oh yes, in that book,
haven't read it yet, Nina, but I'm going to.
But when you read it, Rochelle, be prepared, because I name her.
Oh,
I
okay.
name her. So, but I really thought about it long and hard. I mean, you've asked 2 really fantastic questions, because the whole age thing, the narrator's age, not many people have picked up on it, and yet it really you know, it had me really thinking and working on what the voice would be, and would people call me out on it? And then the Victoria's name, what would it be, and ending up having no name. Anyway, I hope you like the name I've chosen.
I'll look out for it, definitely.
Look out for it, and let Fleur know. I really genuinely would love to know your thoughts.
Thank you.
Does anybody else, do you want to raise your hand if you've got a question, and then you can, right, okay, Laura Daniels, you were quickest off the mark.
Hi, can you hear me all right? Yeah. Nina, I was just curious, because you mentioned, you know, you'd written the memoir, and then that this novel is, you know, somewhat autobiographical, and then you mentioned you are working on another book. And you know, you sort of hear about that difficult second novel, and I just wondered, how it was for you, really.
So I've written 3 novels with this same character, Lizzie Vogel,
Oh.
and they're all published, but they are the same story. They are part of it's the same family, and they are all follow on. They work on their own, but they are one big story. And so in a sense, I am now working on this new novel, and it is in a sense the difficult second novel.
Right.
And I've decided to, I'm very far into it, and I'm writing about a contemporary woman who's roughly my age, but is a little bit younger than me, and she's definitely not me. So I'm writing a fictional character set now, and it is really difficult, because I was for so long now, I was writing Man at the Helm, I mean literally since the 80s, and I've been tinkering with it and sending it to agents, and tinkering with it and sending it to publishers, and then trying it a different way. And so this is my almost first time out on my own. And it is quite frightening, because you haven't got any guidelines. I haven't got, I can't use my memories. I can't use the village. I'm having to make it all up and all cobble together bits. And it's really hard.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Okay, who wants to raise their hand next? We'll try and spot you. Nobody, my goodness. Okay, right, I'm going to do another.
Kim, did you want to ask a question? I don't know, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about it. Yes, I was just thinking about the man at the helm and the shopping list, and wondering how far those characters conform to their real life equivalents, and whether, particularly Mr. Holt.
Yeah, Mr. Holt. Mr. Holt really exists, and it's all absolutely true. From time to time on social media, on Instagram or on Twitter, I will put little pictures of my mum and Mr. Holt, because they're still together. And he really was my mum's boss at the laundry. It was a laundry called Initial Towel Supplies, that you will all have seen in pub toilets and restaurants, and you will have seen the white vans with the IS. They had Initial Supplies, and Mr. Holt was the manager. My mum went there, and she was a bit of a menace, and they ended up getting together. And she really made a play for him, and brought him back for tea and that kind of thing. And it's exactly as written. He came and sorted us out, and it's not a very fashionable story to have, not to have her coping on her own and being her own hero, but we actually did need him, and he came along, and he was hard work, he was cross and grumpy, but he had to hold that line, he had to sort of get us in line, and he's been wonderful. So yeah, and he did do that. My mum used to have these sort of nervous, anxious times in supermarkets. She just literally couldn't, and it was awful, because we went to this great big shop that I've already mentioned called Woolco, and we'd get this huge trolley full of food, and so often she'd just go, no, can't do it. And it was horrible, because we wanted that washing powder and that toilet roll, and one time we got back, and he'd obviously seen it all, and he bought us our shopping, and it was one of the nicest things that's ever happened to me. And we didn't know it was him until in the book I made it that Lizzie had seen, but that didn't happen. I think we just sort of realised later he revealed that he'd done that. But yeah, it was very moving, and it was very interesting. It came back to me, when we were so worried at the beginning of this horrible situation we're in now, when the supermarkets were out of food and people were panicking and putting pictures of empty shelves, and there was no loo roll and no bread. It really reminded me of that. And in fact, I did a thing on Radio 4 where they said, can you read one of your books? And we do this lockdown author thing. And it was suggested that I would read that bit where somebody does the shopping, and it was decided by the producer that actually that might be an insensitive thing, because people were still extremely worried about getting not just food items, but medicines and baby milk. And so yeah, it was a big thing. It's good, nice to talk about that, Kim. A lovely question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, Susie's waving. Susie.
I'm not really sure it's a question particularly, but I really loved the title that was kind of repeated all the way through somehow. You never sort of forgot the title.
Yeah, I did. I mentioned it quite a lot.
Unless I'm always thinking of the title, I don't know, but it just seemed to always be in every chapter.
I think you're right. I think one of the things I do as a writer, and I hadn't realised I did it, was I do repeat a lot. I'll say something again and again and again. And when I wrote Man at the Helm, I remember, for me, the phrase "man at the helm" came from when my sister Victoria said to me, we'll never be respected because we haven't got a man at the helm. And for me, as a little girl, that I didn't think of it as we might think it now, man at the helm, that sort of driving the boat thing. I thought it described a man in your life and your house, and so that's why I sort of have Lizzie repeating it. I do repeat a lot, and I have my characters repeating a lot. And with Man at the Helm, that copy editor, that person I say who goes through and checks everything, he got me and he understood my style. But the second copy editor I had for Paradise Lodge, every time I repeated something, she deleted it. You get to see what they delete. They don't just delete it and it's gone, but you then get your manuscript back with their suggestions. And she had, and she wasn't wrong, it was a stylistic thing, and she felt she didn't enjoy it. So she'd crossed out every repeat, which was how I knew how often I do it. Because, I say at one point in that book, I think I say, the marriage is on the rocks, or is it Man at the Helm that happens? Anyway, it was a phrase like the marriage is on the rocks, and Lizzie's repeating again, oh, well, maybe we can have him as a man at the helm because the marriage is on the rocks, the marriage is on the rocks. And she just struck it through. And so I had to say, no, put it back, that's what she says, and it's not an accident.
No, so, I really liked it. Yeah, it gave it sort of like a rhythm through it.
Yeah, I think it's quite poetic, and I think people speak like that. If people have got an image that they're wedded to, they will say it again and again. I mean, we all have things that we repeat. So another really lovely question. I'm glad you picked up on that. And I think particularly with Man at the Helm, because they were obsessed, those girls. Yeah. They had that list of men because they wanted their man at the helm. And in fact, the phrase comes up in the next two books as well. It's mentioned a couple of times, just as a reminder. This happens a lot in the books. They all work on their own, but there are lots of little surprises where Melody Longlady will crop up, or there'll be mention of Man at the Helm, or a doctor that we've met there will suddenly crop up here, and so on.
Perfect. Thank you,
Susie. Lovely question.
Thanks, Susie. I will just add, it does add to the comedy value as well, because once you've got a phrase like holiday of a lifetime, and with Melody Longlady getting her holiday of the lifetime going to Boston in the fall, and then it comes again at the end of the passage because it needs repeating. It just
it does.
It really works.
It's really fun. One of the things about Man at the Helm was that I published this book first, this other book called Love Nina, and Penguin had come across it by accident, and they published it, and none of us had expected it to do as well as it did, or get the attention it got. It got reviewed in all the papers very quickly, and then people sort of picked it as their Christmas book, and so it sort of launched my career in a way that we hadn't quite expected. So Penguin said, oh, have you got anything else? And I said, yes, I've got this book, Man at the Helm. And so we published it quite quickly. But if I published it now, knowing what I now know, it would have been very different. So for instance, the man at the helm, Mr. Holt, doesn't crop up until right at the end of the book. And apparently that's an absolute no-no. You can't introduce a hero that late in a book. They have to. So I was writing the screenplay for a film of it. And the producer said, you know, this guy, Mr. Holt, he can't be the saviour, and we have to meet him in Act 1. And so it's been really funny writing the correct version of this story. And there were lots of little things that wouldn't be allowed. If I'd taken Man at the Helm to an agent, and the agent had said, yes, I will take you on, and yes, we'll take you to a publisher, they would have knocked it into much better shape. But actually, I'm really glad they didn't, because even though it meanders off in its own way, I prefer it to the other two books, which are much more plotted and much more, it needs to be in this shape, and there needs to be a little tragedy there, and then a solution, and then another, that whole, writing school version of things. I much prefer Man at the Helm, I must say. Did you notice that, Fleur? Because you've read all three, haven't you?
Oh God, don't say that. No, I haven't read all three, so just
Fleur,
like...
right, I'm going, bye.
Stop. I have to just make a case that booksellers are the most hard-pressed to read of everyone.
No,
I feel like I've been giving this, I don't know, I've obviously gone mad in lockdown, and like where we've been working the whole time, and I've been supplying books hither and thither and not reading a single thing. I sort of was started going on a long-winded description of myself as being like a bridge to knowledge, and people walk across my bridge, and occasionally I'll go, good choice, or whatever. I read that, but usually I'm just a silent bridge, and then I go home and go to sleep. So, but I really
apologies, but I'll tell you, I honestly think, Man at the Helm now, if it had been the third book, it would have been a much more. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on this, that it was a slightly unusual shape. I think, if you're used to reading novels by women of my age, you would get a much more crafted book than this sort of weird meander. Rochelle's nodding. Did you see that? Did you feel that, Rochelle?
Yes, Nina. And to be truthful, halfway through, I thought to myself, I'm not sure where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And then, and I thought, no, I'm going to stick with it, and I'm so pleased I did. Although I have to say, you made me cry at the end.
Oh, sorry. Well, that's good. I think you're allowed to. Again, it's funny about the crying thing, because Love Nina, which was my first book, these letters, it was seen as a comedy, very clearly a comedy. I hadn't written it as a comedy because I hadn't written it. It was literally letters that I'd written in the early 80s. And that's all it was. But even I, looking back, found it funny. So when Man at the Helm came out, it was sort of called a comedy. And I didn't know if I was entirely expecting it to be called a comedy. I mean, I knew it was funny, but I thought people might say it was very poignant. It's difficult to know.
What I particularly liked was the fact that it was very... that Lizzie was very non-judgmental, and that would make perfect sense, because she had nothing to compare it to. That was her family life, that was her reality, and she made the best of it with her siblings.
Yeah, and I remember when the hardback of the book goes out, and then you hope to get reviews from the papers and beyond, and you hope that some of them are good, and then what the publisher does is they put out the paperback, and the paperback will have the quotes from the Times and the Guardian or whatever, and I remember when Man at the Helm came out as paperback, it had at the very top comedy gold. And I thought, oh God, people are going to, does it say comedy gold?
No, but sorry.
And you just think, yes, that's lovely, but somebody might read that book and say, actually, it's not just comedy gold, it's actually quite sad and worrying. Sophie's got her hand up.
I was going to ask exactly this, because I didn't find it funny, and I thought it was just me. I found it really sad.
Yeah,
I was really worried about your mum.
Yeah, that's it. And I went to this literary festival soon after it was published at Hay on Wye, this very posh literary festival, and people kept coming up to me, and it was literally half and half. Half the people would say, you know, I loved Man at the Helm, what a wonderful book, I laughed and laughed and laughed. But other people were saying, you know, I was so worried about you, I was so sad, and it, you know, we're all different. But I did think, well, then when the book came out with comedy gold written at the top, I thought, well, that means half of the people that buy this book based on the cover are going to say, well, actually, I didn't find it funny, I found it worrying and sad. I mean, I hope it was enjoyable, whether it was sad or funny. And I, you know, but you know, it was my life, and it was funny, but it was also really worrying. And I am a very worried, neurotic person as a result of that childhood. There's no question. So I can't. Yeah, it's a very interesting one. And I also think that lots of books are seen as very serious, and they're taken as, you know, very literary, serious books. But I find them very funny. So one book I've just read, this very long book, Dux Newburyport. Has anyone read Dux Newburyport? It was shortlisted for the Booker, I think, or was it the Women's Prize? Fleur?
I think it was both. It was on both lists, and it was colossally long.
Yeah, it was over 1,000 pages, and I read it because it was a lockdown and I couldn't write, and I thought I need a long book, and I picked it up and I thought I'm not going to like it, but it's wonderful. I have to say, it's absolutely one of the best books I've ever read. And I don't particularly want long books. I'm not I don't exactly avoid them, but I don't think, oh good, it's, you know, 3 times as long as a normal book. But anyway, it is wonderful. But what not many people tell you about it, it's hilarious. But it's also incredibly brutal and political as well. So it's got everything. But I don't see comedy gold written on the front of that book. You know, so it's very interesting. And what book isn't slightly funny? And if a funny book isn't also sad and poignant, it's kind of missing something. I think I like books that are everything, but then who decides what books go for the comedy prize? It's interesting. I find it absolutely fascinating. Susie's back waving.
I am back. Just sort of funny or sad conversation. There was moments that seemed to be glossed over really quickly, like when yourself and your sister saw your mum shagging.
Yeah, we always saw.
I think, and it was really just like, oh yeah, and we saw the. And then nothing. I mean, if that had happened to me, that would be at least 2 chapters, you know,
Look,
of like conversation.
I think, yeah, you're right. But I mean, we did see her shagging a lot, and I mean, we saw her shagging more often than I wrote in the book. And yeah, I mean, there were 4 of us kids, and we just sort of roamed about, and sometimes we'd open the door, and there she'd be.
You handled it really well. You handled it really well, and
yeah, it was a really funny time. I mean, again, Susie, you're young like Fleur. It's a different time. It really was a different time, and you know, I think sort of the permissiveness of the 60s sort of got slightly bent out of shape, and by the time the early 70s came, it was really quite a weird time sexually. I think women thought they were being liberated. I mean, I'm not saying every woman, it's a huge generalisation, but I think there was a sense in which some women, and certainly my mother was one of these women, she thought she was being liberated and free, and actually she was just objectifying herself all the time, and, you know, making herself sexually available in a way that left her quite empty and sad. But, you know, I think there was quite a lot of that. I saw quite a lot of that.
Oh, Sally's iPad has got a question.
Sally's iPad.
I got to unmute. one of them was that I'm glad that I thought I'd had a bit of a humour bypass, because I wasn't finding it as funny as it was implied.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that everybody else had, or not everybody, several people have had mixed feelings about it. Because there were bits that made me smile, and I loved the 70s stuff. And I tried to put myself in the mind of a 9-year-old sort of thing, but it did feel sad. That's probably just, you know, other things that I've had that are sad. And then what I wanted to know was the name of the other 2 books.
Oh, the other 2 books. The next book is called, oh look, here we go. Paradise Lodge is the second book.
Yeah.
And then the book that just came out last year is Reasons to Be Cheerful.
All right.
Yeah, but I think that I think it was quite a sad time. I mean, I don't know whether I'm just unable to see it from other people's point of view, but I think children were they were either neglected or slightly over sort of controlled. I think there wasn't much of a happy medium, and we were either sort of chucked out of the house and told to F off, or we were, you know, overprotected. And it was a difficult time, and I think there was quite a lot of sadness. It was a difficult time, and I think parents were stressed, and women were just beginning to have to go out to work and manage the family, and it was just all a bit of a mess, I think. I don't know if I'm a bit hard on the 70s, but we glorify it a bit. I think we look back at this sort of golden age of comedy, and, you know, we look back with rosy tinted specs, I think, a bit. I think it was a time of weird, I think women had a really tough time, and I think it was terrible homophobia and racism, and it's just, I think it was just a bit of a grotty time.
Yeah, but as you say, that there were a lot more freedoms for children. We weren't all wedded to our mobile phones and tablets and things.
I think
did go out and play.
Yeah, we went out to play, and also we were so bored, we did things like play the guitar and read books. And I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I would never be cross with them for not reading, because I can sort of see why they don't read very much, because they've got so much to do. I mean, they literally are busy all the time doing stuff. And yes, there's the online thing as well, but they're just busy. There's a lot going on. We had nothing to do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. That was a great question. Fleur, you're silent. You've muted yourself.
Right. I'm pointing to Linda Maynard in the corner.
Linda. Oh, Linda, yes.
Hello.
I see you.
I'm probably going to find it very hard to get this question out right, but it seems to me you create the 70s, that kind of neglectful 70s, so well. And I just wondered how you managed to sustain that, considering you wrote it over such a long period. And were there times when you found it harder? Because I think you're very sympathetic to everybody, and at times with a more modern view of childhood and motherhood and what you'd expect perhaps neighbours to do and schools to do in circumstances where perhaps it becomes obvious that children are struggling. Did you ever sort of get angry? Or I know it's your life, so I don't want to get too personal, but
yeah, no, I don't mind. It's a really good question. I think the biggest thing, the most significant aspect of all of this is that I really, really like my mum, and I've had times when I was a young adult where I was a bit cross with her, just because I thought one should be cross with their parents. I was a bit cross with my dad, and I was a bit cross with my mum, but not terribly. But I'd ring up and say, oh, I'm me and a friend are coming home next weekend, and she'd say, oh, do you need some food? And I'd go, oh, Mum, just chill out. I was a bit selfish and a bit, rude in that way, but nothing much more than that. But I did go through that little bit of, oh, for God's sake, Mum, it's pity you didn't make a baked potato when we were 9, you know, that kind of thing. But I liked her very, very much, and I like her now. And I remember when I first had kids, when I first had my daughter, I suddenly realised how you might have 4 children, how even if you really adored those children,
it's 21 hours,
you could be lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Even with 4 children, you could be terribly lonely. And because I used to think, oh, I wonder why she was so lonely. I mean, she had us, you know. But then when I had my own kids, I thought, actually, it doesn't matter how much you love them. You can be lonely with little kids. And I really liked her. So there's no question of having to sort of forgive her. I sort of just did. I liked her. And I really love this feeling that I don't owe my parents anything. I feel very free. I always have my whole life. I've never felt I owe anyone anything. I've just lived my life and I've wanted to do what I've wanted to do. And I've never thought, oh, I can't tell them this, or Mum's going to be so disappointed, or that's been really nice, because a lot of my friends haven't been able to tell their parents things. Oh, I mustn't tell them, and my mum will be furious. And so that's been a really nice thing. And also, I think because I had these siblings around me all the time, we were fun-loving, and so we did see the funny side. We actually did mostly see the funny side. And there aren't many things that we haven't been able to, you know, laugh at. And I remember laughing, you know, some really tragic things would happen. And I say at one point in Man at the Helm that she tells us something, she's telling us something. And I tried very hard not to laugh like you do at times like that, because we just did laugh at everything. I mean, even when sometimes she was sad, we found that quite funny, that she'd go, oh, I've had sex with the vicar and now he doesn't want to know. And we'd be like, and I don't know, that's been very, we've taken refuge in humour. And so we haven't been cross. I think I was cross with the teacher that sent me to the toilet. Do you remember the teacher that, because I couldn't stop crying? Yeah. And I wasn't sobbing, I wasn't going, ah! I was just silent, little tears were coming. And she made me go to the toilet until I stopped crying. But I couldn't stop. And instead of being sensitive and nice and thinking, oh, poor Nina, and my mum sings in a choir in Leicester with that woman. So my mum said, oh, there's a Miss such and, you know, there's such and such woman there. I'm sure she was at your school. I went, Mum, she was the one that sent me to the cloakroom. And there's lots of people around that still exist. So there was a teacher who drove very strangely. She drove right up to the steering wheel and she contacted me. She went, oh, it was marvellous to read about myself and my funny driving. I just thought nobody would ever read this book.
I'm going to unmute myself. I have to say, just the bit where you go, I can't remember, where you've got the van, before it all goes wrong and you say it's like the happiest moment where you're all together in the van. Oh, I felt that.
That's the initial van. That's in my mum's work van. She drove us out for the afternoon for some reason, which was really unlike her. And then she stupidly got drunk. It was lovely in that van, and she was playing that song, and that's really true. We were just bouncing along, and they'd all had haircuts, and it was really happy. And then she got pissed like an idiot. Was Liz asking a question? Was that Liz? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just, well, I thought of a question, but then when you just said about taking refuge in humour, it kind of made me think, I think that's the reason why it is like sort of equally funny and sad.
Yeah,
I think that kind of, well, for me, the reason it was both of those things was because it's so real. And I think it's when you really believe in characters that you really sort of really care what happens to them, but also it's like you know them, so you kind of think, oh, that's just what she would say. And that's the kind of where I think the comedy comes from. And but my question was sort of when you were saying about sort of seeing those 3 novels as one story, because when you were talking about the shape of them, I was trying to remember sort of about the shape, whether I thought that Man of the Helm had a different shape, and I think I also thought of them as one kind of spending all the time with those characters, and I wondered if you sort of how much you planned, like which books, like which sort of time of your life those books, each book would cover, or if it was quite a natural thing.
That's a good question. Well, I'd written Man at the Helm and I sort of knew it would end with, for those of you, sorry, spoilers, but it would end where my mum met somebody who she could make a life with. And then the next book, I just wrote the next chunk. And then I decided to write the next one to catch up with Love Nina. So it was just a little gap. So I didn't sort of plan it in advance. But what has happened is the second 2, I've forced some plot onto. So they're slightly less autobiographical. I've had to work at, and because I don't know whether all writers do this or all people do this. I know my daughter does this, where you don't notice all the people that say, well done, I love what you've done, but you notice the one person who says, oh, I didn't like it very much. And for me, with Man at the Helm, the one thing that was negative in all the reviews was this one woman said, you know, it's plotless. She referred to it as plotless, and that was a negative thing. She went, you know, there's some funny things and blah, blah, blah. It was, you know, plotless and just a sort of pointless meander. And instead of thinking, well, everybody else liked it, so I will carry on doing it, I thought, oh, I've got to write plot. I've got to, oh my God. So I completely micro-responded, which I would not recommend anyone else doing, but I did do that. So for Paradise Lodge, I absolutely planned it so that, you know, and so I did plan in that respect, but I didn't think I'll do that book and then that book and that book. What I'm thinking now is when I said that the Reasons to Be Cheerful would be the last book, and lots of people have contacted me and said, oh no, please write about Lizzie again. So I might, you know, have a U-turn on that and come back, but after the years, the Love Nina years, which is the letters years, which is my sort of college and London time. So I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'm going to unmute myself. Nina, I think we're going to have to finish there. I was going to ask you what you were reading, but you told us about Dux Newburyport. I was wondering, have you read anything shorter that somebody might want to tackle?
Recently, well, I've just started this book, literally just started it 2 days ago, called The Blessed Girl. It might be The Blessed Girl. It's called, the author's Angela McCowler. I don't know how you spell it because I haven't got it in front of me. I'm reading it on my phone, you know. And it's a comedy. It's The Blessed Girl by Angela McCowler or McCooler. She's South African and she's a really bad, mischievous woman. And it's all about women and power and money. And it's now, and she's young and she's black and she's South African. And it's so funny and naughty and bad. It's making me absolutely howl. It's making me cackle. I'm reading going, because it's so bad. But because I'm an old woman now, so I'm really shocked at some of the things she does. And she's been shortlisted for this prize, the Comedy Women in Print, which I've also been shortlisted for. And when you're shortlisted for a prize, you read the other stuff and you just think, well, this is, and I think Angela McCowler will win it. I hope she does, because she's just funny. So I would highly recommend that. But I would also recommend Dux Newburyport. If you're strong, go for it.
And you've got lots of time. I don't know. We're sort of feeling like everyone's going back to work. It's kind of maybe, I don't know, maybe people can do it.
Anyway, thanks for all your questions, everybody, and thank you so much for reading it and joining in. It's been really lovely. I feel really honoured.
Look, I'm going to be like a 70s. I'm going to do this again. I'm going to be like a 70s game show host, and I'm going to hold them up one at a time and just say, and even Love Nina. as well.
yes.
Just say, anybody who hasn't read any of these, if you want to, then we have them at the bookshop and you can order them and talk some more when we can all meet in real life and talk as well, which will probably be before.
And I'm dying to hear what Rochelle thinks about the sister's name.
I have to say, I know we just delivered that to you just like this week, didn't we, Rochelle? So there we are. Good. So thank you so much, Nina. Thank you so much for coming, and thank everybody for joining in. And I have chosen the next book. If I can just say, I feel really bad because it's not funny. It's quite earnest, but I thought that it would be a really, really good thing to read next. So I will be posting this on the Facebook page. So we're going to read James Baldwin.
Oh,
have you read this?
Which one?
Giovanni's Room.
Oh, I haven't read that one.
Right, because I've only read his non-fiction, and this is like, it's quite slight, and I've been feeling guilty because we keep trying to put lists on the bookshop website and then we run out of time, and because it's a gay love story and it's Pride Month and we haven't managed to do a Pride list, so we're going to read like a sort of classic James Baldwin. So that's the next book. So I look forward to seeing you all again in a few weeks' time when we can be talking about that. So Linda, did you have something? Did you want to? No. Oh, you were just waving. Okay, well thank you so much for coming again, and thank you, Nina. That was really, really
thanks for having me. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.